Teary-eyed he sat, head sunken in a state that depicted both disappointment and shame. The unpleasant shroud of darkness lovingly caressed the room, pressing its cold lips against his trembling skin. Outside, the magnificent bullfrogs held their sway in a nearby pond, manipulating their bass-line vocal cords to unleash decibels of ferocious symphonies, strong enough to seduce their mates and irritate anybody else. The sky was a pit, starless, grim, and endless. The wind prowled like a hungry animal, rattling window panes and whispering through the cracks. Every few seconds, lightning slashed across the heavens, momentarily bleaching the world in white before surrendering it again to the suffocating dark. He sat in the center of it all, the storm, the silence, the implosion of memory. The faint melody of summertime sadness leaked from an old stereo, haunting and hollow, as if even the song itself knew what was about to happen. On the table before him sat the trinity of his final act, a half-drunk glass of vodka, a scattered handful of barbiturates, 6, maybe 7, it didn't matter, and a standard-issued Magnum pistol, cold, clean, and waiting. He'd bought it from someone who didn't ask questions. He liked that about the man. No questions, no judgments, just a smooth exchange of cash and metal. The serial number had been filed away, leaving the weapon as anonymous as the despair that now filled the room. He picked up the glass. The vodka burned its way down, searing his throat like regret. It wasn't strong enough to numb the ache. Nothing was. It wasn't always like this. Once, this same room had been filled with light, sunlight spilling across the wooden floors, laughter bouncing off the walls, her laughter bright and reckless, the kind that made the air shimmer. There had been plants by the window, her books stacked on the shelves in organized chaos, her scent, jasmine and salt and something else, in everything he touched. Now it was only dust and ghosts. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The fan spun lazily above him, making the faintest of creaks, the kind that could drive a man mad in solitude. The thought came again, gentle but persuasive. End it. The idea wasn't new. Had followed him for weeks, maybe months. At first it had whispered. Now it roared. The world outside his mind had shrunk into a series of gray, repetitive motions. Wake, stare, drink, remember, curse, sleep, repeat. Every day bled into the next. Every night brought her back. In dreams, in memories, in the unrelenting guilt that gnawed through his sanity. Her name still carried electricity. Amara. He could still see her the first day they met. That crowded cafe near the art district, where time moved differently. She'd been sketching something in her notebook, something that looked like wings. He'd spilled his coffee, stammered an apology, and she'd laughed. Not out of mockery but amusement, pure and unfiltered. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she'd said, eyes gleaming with the promise of trouble. He had. He just didn't know it yet. From that moment, they had spun into each other's lives like comets. Nights that blurred into mornings. Conversations that lasted through dawn. Music, travel, kisses that tasted of adventure and naivety. They'd built a world out of shared hunger, believing love could outrun everything. Time, distance, even the truth. But truth always caught up. He remembered the first crack. subtle, almost invisible. She'd started disappearing for hours, claiming she was at work, at a gallery with friends. He hadn't believed her. And then came the lies, the arguments, the silences sharp enough to cut skin. He'd called her names he couldn't forget. She'd thrown words that still bruised his mind. And then one night she was gone. No note. No closure. Just the echo of her voice in the walls. He told himself she'd left him for someone else, that she was cruel, heartless, fickle. Anything to justify the hatred that made breathing possible. But even hatred, when it burned long enough, turned to ash. Now only ash remained. The storm outside grew violent. The frogs fell silent, as if even nature sensed the tension brewing in the room. The vodka glass trembled slightly on the table. He reached for the gun. The metal was heavier than he remembered. Or maybe his guilt was. He placed it beneath his chin like he'd seen in the movies. His finger hovered on the trigger. The world began to collapse into sound. Thunder, wind, the beating of his heart. This was it. The final punctuation. But then, sound. Knock. Soft at first, almost polite. He froze. The gun pressed against his jaw, finger trembling. Another knock followed. Firmer, impatient, like someone who had been standing in the rain too long. He lowered the weapon, breath shaking. His mind raced. No one visited him, not anymore. Who would knock at this hour? Who's there? He called, voice cracking. No answer. The doorknob turned. He knew he had locked it. He remembered locking it. The bolts scraped, the hinges moaned, and then the door opened with a sigh. A silhouette stood framed by the lightning, soaked, motionless. Then the flash came, bright, merciless. It was her. Mara. Water streamed down her face. Her hair clinging to her cheeks. Her eyes, those same impossible eyes, gleamed in the half-light. But something was wrong. They seemed distant, hollow, as if they were reflecting light from another world. "Amara," he whispered. She tilted her head slightly, that familiar gesture, teasing and tender. A faint smile curved her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. He stumbled back, knocking over the chair. "No, you're not real. You're dead to me." Her voice was calm, liquid, timeless. "Then why am I here?" The scent hit him, jasmine and salt. Her scent. The one that had vanished from his sheets months ago. "You left," he said bitterly. "You destroyed me." "I know." She took a step forward. "But I also saved you." He laughed, raw and broken. "Saved me. Look around you. Does this look like salvation?" Her gaze drifted toward the gun on the table, then back to him. "I came to stop you." Lightning flared, cutting the room into two halves, light and shadow, life and death. For a heartbeat, she vanished into the glare. Then she was gone. The door remained ajar, swaying gently. He stood frozen, his mind fracturing beneath the weight of disbelief. The storm roared louder, swallowing every sound. Perhaps it was the vodka, or the pills, or madness itself. And then, a vibration. His phone. He turned, grabbed it. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Don't hang up," a voice said, female, breathless, panicked. "You don't know me, but I need your help." "What?" They took her. "Please, come to the old church by the pond. She said you'd understand." His stomach twisted. Who said that?" "Amara." The line went dead. He stood in silence, listening to the echo of her name through the static. The storm beat against the windows like fists. Then, as if under a spell, he grabbed his coat and stepped out into the night. The rain swallowed him whole. It lashed against his face in sharp, slanting needles as he stumbled down the narrow dirt road that led away from his house. The flashlight from his phone barely pierced the fog that crawled low over the ground like something alive. His breath came out ragged, visible, vanishing into the dark. The air smelled of earth and electricity, the premonition of something divine or disastrous. The road curved past the pond where the frogs had once been loud and triumphant. Now it was still, save for the ripples spreading from the raindrops. His reflection wavered there, pale, gaunt, half-dead, and for a moment he thought he saw her beside him, a trick of lightning on the surface. He turned away before he could be sure. The old church loomed in the distance, its crooked steeple piercing the gray sky like an accusation. It had been abandoned years ago, before he and Amara had even met. Back when belief itself had started leaking from the hearts of the faithful. He remembered passing it once with her, that afternoon after the storm when they had walked barefoot through puddles, laughing at nothing, high on the simple miracle of being alive. She'd stopped in front of the church, staring up at the stained glass windows. "It's strange," she had said then, "how even broken glass can still catch light." Now that memory felt like a ghost itself, whispering as he approached. He pushed open the door. The hinges cried out like something dying. Inside, the air was damp and ancient. Wood rot, mildew, the faint residue of incense that lingered despite decades of abandonment. Water dripped steadily from the cracked ceiling, forming small reflective pools between the pews. Candles, impossibly, flickered in a cluster near the altar. And there, in their trembling light, sat a figure. His pulse quickened. "Amara!" The figure did not move. He stepped closer, his shoes sinking slightly into the waterlogged floor. "Amara, is that?" She looked up, and the world stopped again. Her face was lit by the candlelight, delicate and distant. She was impossibly beautiful in the way grief could sometimes be, when it blurs the line between love and pain. Her eyes shimmered, but not with tears. They looked hollow, reflective, as though holding another reality within them. He stopped several feet away, afraid that if he moved too close she'd vanish again. "Is this real?" he whispered. Her voice was the same as before, calm, low, almost carried by the storm itself. "As real as your guilt." He flinched. The words struck deeper than any blade could. "Why are you doing this to me?" "You never asked why I left," she said softly. "I didn't care," he snapped. "Yes, you did," she murmured. "You just feared the truth." He swallowed, shaking his head. "No, I know the truth. You cheated. You lied. You. I was dying. The words hung in the air, fragile, final. He blinked. What? The tests came back, she said, voice trembling for the first time. Stage 4. Terminal. I couldn't bear to make you watch me fade. So I left before you could see what would become of me. He stood motionless, the sound of the rain filling the silence between them. His throat tightened, his body numb. You're lying, he said weakly. This is some cruel dream. I lied then, she said. Not now. He took a step forward, shaking. You let me hate you. It was easier that way. He laughed, a small broken sound. Easier. I wanted to die tonight because of you. I know. She rose from where she sat, the candlelight bending around her. When she moved closer, he felt the cold radiating off her skin. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his shoulder. Not warm, but not entirely cold either. Something in between. That's why I came back. To haunt me, he whispered. To save you. The candles flickered, struggling against a sudden gust of wind that slithered through the cracks in the stained glass. For a second the room dimmed, and her outline shimmered like static, fading, returning, fading again. Amara, I don't understand, he said, his voice trembling. What are you? Her eyes lifted toward the window where lightning forked across the sky. A memory. A warning. Maybe both. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her like before, but something in her face told him not to. She looked both here and elsewhere, caught between presence and absence. The thin line between love and illusion. I came, she said, because tonight you were going to follow me. Too soon, too cruelly. And it isn't time. He clenched his fists. And what? You'll stop me with riddles. No, she said, stepping closer. With truth. And then, as if the air itself bent, he was no longer standing in the church. He was there 2 years ago. The same room but brighter. Her laughter filling it. The smell of paint and coffee. He saw himself watching her sketch by the window. Sunlight making halos in her hair. He blinked, disoriented. What is this? Your memory, she said, voice echoing softly beside him. You buried it beneath your anger. He turned to face her, and there she was, alive, whole, smiling. Do you remember what you said that day? She asked. He shook his head, dazed. You said, if love dies, I'll die with it. And I laughed. I told you that love doesn't die. It just changes form. She looked at him sadly. But you never believed me. He looked down at his hands. Maybe I still don't. The world blurred again. The sunlight melted into darkness. He was back in the church, the candles still burning, the rain louder now. A relentless percussion against the roof. She was fading again like smoke. Wait, he shouted. Don't go. She looked at him with a tenderness so painful it almost felt cruel. You can follow me, she whispered. Right now. The gun. Pills. Just close your eyes. He froze. Or, she continued, you can live and forgive. Live for the both of us. His heart hammered. "I don't know how." She smiled faintly. "Then start by walking away." Lightning struck again, illuminating her face one final time. Serene, distant, at peace. And then she was gone. The candles went out. Darkness swallowed the church. He stood alone, shaking, drenched in grief and rain and disbelief. Somewhere nearby, water dripped rhythmically into a puddle, each drop echoing like a clock counting down. He stumbled forward toward the altar where she had stood. Something glimmered faintly in the dark. He knelt. A small silver locket. He recognized it instantly. The one he'd given her on her birthday 2 years before. His trembling fingers pried it open. Inside was a small photo of her smiling, and a folded piece of paper. He opened it. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you. But love does not die. It changes form." Tears blurred the words, smearing the ink. He pressed the note to his chest, his sobs swallowed by the thunder. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Minutes, hours, before the storm began to fade. The church doors creaked open slightly, letting in the first pale light of dawn. When he finally stepped outside, the world had quieted. The rain had stopped. The pond shimmered faintly in the distance, mist rising like breath. The frogs had resumed their song. He walked home barefoot. When he reached his door, he didn't turn on the light. He went straight to the table, set down the locket, and stared at the gun. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he picked it up, not to aim it, but to unload it. The metallic click of the bullets spilling onto the table was almost musical. He poured the vodka down the sink, crushed the remaining pills beneath his heel, and watched the white dust dissolve into nothing. Then he opened the window. The dawn air rushed in, cool, alive, forgiving. It carried the scent of wet earth, of something beginning again. He stood there for a long while listening. And somewhere, faint and soft, carried by the whisper of the wind, came a voice, familiar, patient, eternal. "Not tonight. Love does not die. It changes form. But sometimes it changes into silence." Anonymous. The morning after felt unreal, the kind of fragile calm that only comes when the storm hasn't truly left, merely paused. He hadn't slept. The window remained open through the night, the curtains breathing in and out with the wind, as though the room itself was trying to remember how to live again. The locket sat on the table beside the disarmed gun, glinting faintly in the dawn. He couldn't bring himself to close it. Every time his eyes drifted away, he swore he saw it pulse, as if something inside it still moved, softly like a heartbeat. He made coffee he didn't drink, showered under water that refused to warm, and stood before the mirror that refused to reflect him as he remembered. The man staring back was older, emptied. His eyes rimmed red but strangely clear. He looked almost at peace, and that terrified him more than despair ever had. At noon he left the house again. The road was quiet, the puddles drying, but he felt eyes on him, the same invisible presence that had once followed him through dreams. When he passed the pond, the frogs went silent, one by one, as if some unseen conductor had drawn down a curtain of silence. He stopped and stared at the reflection in the water. Only his face now, no ghost beside it. Yet something shimmered faintly beneath the surface, the hint of a figure just beyond sight. He knelt and whispered, "If you're still here, I don't know what you want me to do." The pond rippled just once, circular, deliberate. He stood unsettled. "Fine," he muttered. "Then I'll find out myself." The church was still there, of course, half ruined, its door yawning open as though it had been expecting him. The air smelled of old smoke and wet stone. The candles were gone, replaced by the faint scent of burnt wax and something floral. Lilies, maybe. The floorboards were drier now, but the watermarks remained, like veins of memory across the wood. He walked to the altar, the place where she had stood. In the half-light, he noticed something he hadn't before. Carvings along the pews, initials and symbols left by old hands. He brushed away dust and saw their names, A+D. Not his and Amara's. Someone else's. From long before. But beside them, someone had etched another set, fresher, smaller. +M. He froze. His breathing quickened. No, that can't be. He had never been here with her, not inside. That memory of walking past the church, barefoot in the rain, that was the closest they had come. So how? He traced the initials with trembling fingers. The letters were carved deep, deliberate, and new enough to gleam faintly in the gray light. "Amara," he whispered. "What did you do?" A sound stirred, faint, metallic, from the far end of the church. He turned sharply. A small box sat half-hidden beneath a collapsed pew. Locked with a rusted clasp. He hesitated, then pried it open. Inside, a stack of yellowed envelopes bound with twine. Each one sealed, dated. The topmost read simply, "For when you're ready." He opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was hers, careful, looping, the same as in the note from the locket. "You won't understand this at first. Maybe you never will. But if you've come here, it means the storm finally brought you back. The truth isn't what you think it is. I left because I was dying, yes. But not only that. There was more. Something I couldn't tell you without breaking what little peace we had left. I didn't want to lie. I wanted to protect you. But the body doesn't just die. It confesses. Mine did. In ways I didn't expect." He stopped reading. His fingers trembled. There were more pages, but something inside him resisted. A dread that felt too alive to touch. He folded the letter back, placed it in his coat pocket, and left the box where it was. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised gold, that in-between hour when light pretends it isn't fading. He walked toward home but took a different path, one that led through the woods. The air here was thick with the smell of wet bark and old earth. Halfway through, he came upon a clearing. It took him a moment to realize what he was looking at. A small grave marked not by stone, but by a wooden cross. Weathered, tilted, barely legible. He knelt and brushed the dirt away. The name carved there made his blood freeze. Amara E. His breath caught in his throat. He had never seen this grave before. He'd never been told where she was buried. Her parents had refused him at the funeral, accused him of things he couldn't bring himself to deny or defend. That day had blurred into vodka and thunder. He'd woken 2 days later on his bathroom floor. And now this. Someone had left fresh flowers at the foot of the cross. Lilies again. He looked around. No one. The woods whispered. He opened the letter again. If you've found my resting place, then you've already begun to remember. There are things we bury not out of deceit, but out of mercy. You were angry with me for leaving, but you never asked what it cost me to stay as long as I did. You think I didn't know about the pills you hid behind the medicine cabinet. The nights you disappeared into silence while I pretended to sleep. You were unraveling even before I was. He dropped the letter. It fell into the damp leaves like something ashamed. I didn't, he started, then stopped. 'Cause he remembered. The night she found the bottle. The argument. Her hands trembling. The rain outside just like tonight. He had shouted, said things no apology could unmake. And in that chaos she had fled the house. He had followed, but by the time he found her car at the bridge, he sank to his knees. God! He had always told himself she left him, that she had chosen to disappear rather than face him again. But now the silence between memory and reality began to blur, and in that space something terrible moved. The bridge. A storm. The way her headlights had vanished into the water. That night, he dreamed of her again. Not as a ghost, but as she was in life. Laughing, paint on her hands, teasing him about his clumsy sketches. She reached for him, and for a moment he felt it. The warmth of her skin, the pulse of her heartbeat. Then her expression changed. You remember now, she said. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. You remember what you did. He woke with a scream lodged in his throat, sweat and rain indistinguishable on his face. The window was still open. The locket had fallen to the floor. When he picked it up, the photo inside was gone. In its place, a piece of paper no larger than a breath. Come back to the church. He shouldn't have gone. Every nerve told him not to. But guilt has its own gravity, and has pulled him toward that broken place again. The night was windless this time, but colder. The moon hung low, heavy with light. The door to the church was wide open, though he hadn't left it that way. Inside, the air shimmered faintly, a thin veil of heat or energy that shouldn't exist. At the altar, a single candle burned, and beside it her, exactly as before. He wanted to cry, to curse, to beg, but all he could manage was a whisper. I remember. A turn. Then you know. I never meant to. Intent doesn't erase consequence, she said gently. I tried to save you. You tried to own me, she corrected. Even in love. Especially in love. He stepped forward. So what now? You punish me from beyond. Her gaze softened. You punish yourself enough. She held out her hand. Between her fingers something glimmered, a ring. the one she'd worn every day. He reached for it. Their fingers brushed. For a heartbeat the air hummed, a note too pure for this world. Then her eyes filled with light. "You have to let me go." "I can't." "Yes, you can," she said. "But only if you forgive the part of you that killed me." The world tilted. He saw again the bridge, the rain, the moment she turned back toward him. Headlights glaring, her mouth forming his name just before the car veered. He staggered. "No." Her voice was a whisper now. "Not tonight." The candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. He woke at dawn again, on the church floor, the ring clutched in his hand. Outside, the sun rose over the pond, casting gold across the fog. He stood, walked out into the light. He didn't know if he was alive, forgiven, or merely dreaming still. The letter in his pocket had dissolved into unreadable ink. The locket was gone. The grave in the woods, when he searched for it later, would no longer be there. All that remained was the echo of her voice, somewhere between his heart and the wind. And every night after, when he felt the weight of the past pressing too close, he would whisper back, as both prayer and surrender, "Not tonight." The weeks that followed did not feel like healing. They felt like aftermath, the stillness after an explosion, when every sound seems softer only because the ears are still ringing. He stopped keeping track of time. Mornings bled into evenings, and the days folded quietly into each other. Sometimes he thought he could hear her humming in the next room, that small, half-forgotten tune she used to sing when she was mixing colors on her palette. Other times the silence was so complete he almost believed he'd imagined everything: the church, the locket, the letters, even her voice. The gun remained gone. He didn't remember throwing it away, only the relief that came from no longer knowing where it was. In its place, the table held new things: a sketchbook, a single vase of wildflowers, a half-empty jar of paintbrushes. The locket's chain hung around his wrist now, the empty pendant cool against his skin. He began to paint again. Not well, never well, but earnestly. Landscapes mostly. Horizons that seemed to stretch too far, skies that never quite settled on one color. Sometimes when he finished, he'd step back and see her in them. Her silhouette faint in the strokes of light, her reflection buried in the paint's wet gleam. He'd blink and she'd vanish. But that was fine. It no longer frightened him. It almost felt like forgiveness. One afternoon, while walking along the road beyond the pond, he met the caretaker of the old church, an old man with a limp and eyes that had seen too much weather. The man stopped when he recognized him. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, voice thick with accent and suspicion. "You were here that night. During the storm." He hesitated. "Yes." The man nodded toward the church in the distance. "Funny thing," he said, scratching his beard. "You light candles in a place that's empty. They shouldn't stay burning after you leave." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the caretaker said, lowering his voice, "when I came back the next morning, the floor was soaked, but the altar dry. Candles still lit. Like someone'd been watching over him." He didn't answer. The old man squinted at him. "You all right, son?" He forced a thin smile. Better than I deserve. The caretaker nodded slowly, then tapped the brim of his hat and moved on. But before he vanished down the hill, he said, almost as an afterthought, "Some folks say she's still around. The girl, I mean. They see her light up there some nights. You tell me, you ever see her?" He didn't look back. "Every night," he said quietly. At home, he reread the letter he had salvaged, or what was left of it. The ink had bled into the paper until only fragments remained legible. But somehow the missing words made it more truthful. "You were never my sin. You were my unfinished prayer. Let go. The bridge. Forgive yourself. Not yet. Not tonight." He folded it carefully and slipped it beneath the vase of wildflowers. They had started to wilt, but beautifully, like things that understood their purpose. Days later, he went back to the woods to find her grave again. It wasn't there. He searched for hours, cutting through briars and wet grass, until he was certain he was standing exactly where it had been. The tilted cross, the lilies, her name carved into the wood. Now only leaves, soil, and a few stones remained. For a moment, he wondered if he had dreamed it all. But when he knelt to touch the earth, his fingers brushed something cold. A small, rusted nail, the kind used to fix wood to wood. He held it up to the light, and though it was nothing special, he felt a strange reverence. He pocketed it, stood, and turned back toward the path. As he walked away, the wind stirred behind him, faint, almost like a sigh. That night the dreams returned. He was standing in the church again, though it looked different, restored somehow. Sunlight filtered through whole, unbroken stained glass, scattering fragments of color across the pews. Dust floated like gold. Amara sat at the altar, painting on a small canvas. Her hands were clean, her laughter soft. When she noticed him, she didn't speak. She just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and gestured for him to join her. He sat beside her, watching as she filled the canvas with color. He couldn't tell what she was painting until she leaned away slightly. It was him. But not as he used to be. Younger, unbroken, eyes full of light. He turned to her, wanting to say thank you or sorry or something in between. But the words wouldn't form. The air shimmered. She reached for his hand and placed the brush in it. "Your turn," she said. He looked down at the brush, then at the blank canvas beside hers. He dipped it into the color she'd mixed, gold and gray, and pressed it to the surface. When he looked up again, she was gone. But her voice lingered, gentle as a heartbeat. "Keep painting." He woke with tears on his face and the faint smell of oil paint in the air. Months passed. Seasons folded over themselves quietly. The house became brighter, less haunted by its own echoes. The frogs by the pond grew louder again, until their calls filled the night like a steady pulse. He began to walk at dusk, always to the edge of the pond, sometimes farther. He found peace in the ritual of it, in the rhythm of footsteps that no longer led to despair. Neighbors started greeting him again, cautiously at first, then warmly. Someone at the local gallery convinced him to bring a few of his paintings. They weren't remarkable, but they carried something raw, something alive. The curator hung them in the corner under soft light, beside a small plaque that simply read, "Study of Absence." He never explained what it meant. People saw what they wanted to. Grief, love, redemption, ghosts. He let them. Because he was no longer sure himself. On the anniversary of her death, if death was still the right word, he returned to the church one last time. It was nearly sunset. The steeple leaned more now, the roof sagged, but the door still stood open. Inside, he found the pews coated in dust and silence. Yet when he reached the altar there was something new. A painting, small, delicate, its frame cracked with age. It showed a woman standing by a pond, her back turned. Her reflection merging with the water until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He knew that brushwork. It was hers. He touched the corner of the frame, and beneath his fingertips, the paint felt warm. There was a note pinned beneath it. Not handwritten but printed, recent. Restored with permission of the artist's estate. Amara E. 1987 to 2021. He stared at the dates. They didn't make sense. Amara hadn't been born in 1987, had she? He tried to remember, but suddenly the years tangled. Time itself felt slippery, like water cupped in trembling hands. He stepped back. The candle at the altar flared once, though no wind had passed. And for an instant, in the reflection of the cracked glass window, he saw her again, not smiling, not sad, just there, watching. "Did you forgive me?" he whispered. Her reflection tilted its head, almost a nod. Then she was gone. The light dimmed. The church grew still again. He stood there until the last trace of color left the sky. Then, quietly, he whispered the only prayer he knew. "Not tonight." Years later, when they found him, the house was clean, orderly. On the table were dozens of small canvases, each one painted with the same scene. A pond, a reflection, a figure fading into light. No one ever figured out who the woman was. The locket, the ring, the letters, all gone. Only one thing remained. A single page of his sketchbook, left open, the last line written in his hand, neat and deliberate. Love does not die. It changes form. And sometimes it changes into silence.